A frail but proud man in his late 60s, Ray Dawson, a decorated war veteran, stands on the steps of City Hall. In his arms, a worn American flag folded into a triangle. At his feet, two duffel bags and a rolled-up mattress. Across from him, a sharply dressed figure in a designer coat and polished smile, Mayor Ellen Royce, addresses a small crowd and press cameras.
Mr. Dawson, with all due respect to your service, this property is no longer yours. You've been given notice. It's time to move on.
I didn't serve this country to be thrown out on the sidewalk by the people I fought for.
No one's throwing you anywhere, sir. We're just rezoning. You can thank the New Green Initiative. Maybe try the shelter on Ninth.
I've seen enemy uniforms with more honor.
There's a hush. Some people avert their eyes. Others raise their phones to record. Then a sound rises in the distance, a low rumble. An armored black SUV turns the corner, flags fluttering. The crowd stirs. A murmur spreads. Voice in crowd. Wait! Is that? Ray Dawson had lived in the same modest brick house on Elm Street for 42 years. The paint on the porch had peeled. The roof had needed repair since the last winter storm. The American flag in his front yard, weathered and faded, still stood taller than any man on the block. Neighbors called him Mr. Ray Kids, waved at him from their bikes. Strangers sometimes asked about the medals framed in his front window. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. Ray was a veteran of 2 tours overseas, a Marine who had watched friends fall beside him in desert heat and never once questioned why he kept going. His wife had died 5 years earlier from lung disease, and since then the house had grown quieter. He spent his mornings walking to the corner diner for coffee and his evenings reading on the porch, always with a worn paperback in hand and a radio tuned to the news. It was a quiet life, a proud life, until the letter came. It arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. No signature, just a seal from the office of the mayor. It read like a legal threat, but spoke like a dismissal. In light of our new urban revitalization plan, it said, your property has been selected for repurposing under the Municipal Development Code. There were clauses and citations, but the message was clear. Pack up and leave. The city needs your land. Ray blinked twice. He reread it 3 times. No phone number, no human name, just cold type on warm paper. At first, he thought it was a mistake, maybe a clerical error, maybe meant for someone else. But when he visited City Hall the next morning, the receptionist didn't even look up from her screen. You're on the list, she said flatly. You'll be contacted. He was. 3 times in 2 weeks. First a city representative, then a building inspector. Finally, a code enforcement officer who pointed out a cracked sidewalk and a potential fire risk due to aging wiring. Each visit came with increasing urgency and veiled threats of legal action if he didn't comply. The neighbors noticed. They started asking questions. One even organized a small petition, but it gained little traction. Some were afraid to get involved. Others had already received similar notices and quietly sold their homes to private developers working with the city. And in the background of it all stood one name, Mayor Ellen Royce. She had swept into office on promises of modernization, sustainability, and cleansing the city of obsolete infrastructure. In speeches, she called it progress. In practice, it meant bulldozing memory. Ray didn't attend the community forums. He wasn't invited. But he watched them online, watched as she smiled at cameras and spoke of a better, brighter tomorrow. Never once did she mention the people being displaced. Never once did she use the word veteran. 3 weeks after the first letter, a formal notice was nailed to his front door. 2 police officers stood at the curb, not meeting his eye. The deadline was final. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Ray packed slowly. A duffel bag of clothes, his late wife's favorite mug, his Marine Corps flag. He folded the American flag from the front yard himself. But the night before he was supposed to leave, something in him shifted. He hadn't fought for perfect outcomes or flawless leaders. He had fought for the idea that every man, no matter his title, was owed basic dignity. He had walked through gunfire with less fear than he now felt opening his own mailbox. So when the sun rose that Tuesday morning, he didn't quietly disappear. He stood outside City Hall, just like he had done in the opening scene. Not to beg, not to protest, but simply to be seen. And in doing so, he unknowingly lit a spark that would burn through far more than the stone steps beneath his boots. By Wednesday morning, the video had already hit 400,000 views. Someone in the crowd, no one knew who, had filmed Ray's confrontation with Mayor Royce on the steps of City Hall. The clip was less than 90 seconds long, but it spread like wildfire. Ray's trembling voice, the worn flag in his hand, and the mayor's cold dismissal were all the internet needed. The caption read, "War hero evicted for progress. Welcome to modern leadership." The responses were swift and divided. On one side, outrage. Is this how we treat veterans now? He served this country. She serves herself. Elections have consequences. This one just went too far. On the other side, silence. Deafening silence. The mayor's office refused interviews. Press inquiries were redirected to a redevelopment liaison. City council members released vague statements about misinformation and context. Ray, however, had no spokesperson. He didn't need one. He had his porch. And for the first time in years, people came, not just neighbors, but strangers. They brought coffee, sandwiches, a clean pair of boots. One man from out of state dropped off a card that simply read, "You're not invisible." Ray sat quietly, unsure of what to make of it all. His small front yard became a kind of informal gathering place. Veterans in old uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder with young men in hoodies. A woman from the local VFW handed out pins that said, "Stand with Ray." A retired teacher offered to start a GoFundMe. By Thursday, there were over $18,000 in donations. Someone even brought a folding chair with Ray's name embroidered on it. But the mayor's office wasn't idle. Flyers began appearing on lampposts and bus stops. Don't fall for a stunt. Veteran or not, the law applies to everyone. Responsible development. They were printed on glossy cardstock, professionally designed, signed, "The Office of the People." A local radio host mocked Ray as a relic from the Reagan era who doesn't understand zoning codes. An op-ed in the city paper called the footage misleading and argued that progress requires sacrifice. Ray didn't reply. Not to the praise, not to the hate. He just stayed. Then, late Thursday night, while most of the block was asleep, something changed. Two plain vans pulled up to the corner of Elm Street. Workers in dark uniforms stepped out, holding rolled-up documents and flashlights. Without a word, they began installing orange fencing around the edge of Ray's lawn. A sign was hammered into the ground. "City demolition. Phase 1 begins Monday." No one knocked on his door. No one gave warning. Just fencing. Plastic tape. Silence. Ray stood on the porch in his robe, staring out as the men finished the job. One of them met his eyes for half a second, then looked away. By morning, the fencing was trending. A new image hit social media. Ray Dawson in slippers, holding coffee, standing behind plastic orange barricade tape. Caption, "This is what respect looks like now." Even national news outlets started circling. CNN mentioned it briefly. Fox News ran a late-night segment titled "The War on Our Warriors." Hashtags like Ray deserves better and Hold the Line spread across every platform. But the mayor doubled down. She appeared on a local morning show, poised and smiling. "Look, we appreciate Mr. Dawson's service," she said. "But service doesn't mean exemption from community planning. Sentiment cannot override law." It was the last line that ignited a deeper fire. Across the country, Americans who had grown used to feeling unheard suddenly saw themselves in Ray. Not because they'd been in battle, but because they'd felt erased. And that morning, just after the mayor's interview aired, a single post appeared on Truth Social. Short, sharp, and unlike anything the mayor's office was prepared for. "We take care of our veterans. I'm on my way. Donald J. Trump." 3 hours later, a black SUV departed from a private airstrip outside D.C., and the city of Westbrook was about to learn the difference between enforcing silence and being silenced. By the time the SUV's black tires rolled over the cracked asphalt of Elm Street, the neighborhood was unrecognizable. Gone were the quiet mornings. In their place stood barricades of media vans, citizens with hand-painted signs, off-duty cops volunteering for crowd control, and a line of veterans stretching from Ray Dawson's front gate to the community park 2 blocks over. Some wore dress blues. Others had worn jeans and faded hats that hadn't come off their heads in years. But they all stood for the same thing: respect. For a man. For memory. For meaning. Ray sat on his porch, as always. The orange fencing still framed his yard like a cage. His folded flag rested on his lap, and his old Marine boots sat polished beside him. His eyes, tired but alert, scanned the commotion but didn't chase it. He hadn't asked for a hero. He'd asked to be left alone. But heroes don't always knock. Sometimes they arrive. The first glimpse came in the form of a Secret Service agent jogging up the sidewalk. Then the unmistakable glint of sunlight off a navy blue suit. And finally, a familiar figure. Hair windswept, tie tight, expression unreadable, emerged from the back of the vehicle and walked directly toward Ray's porch. Donald J. Trump didn't wave. He didn't speak to the cameras. He didn't look at the signs or the reporters or the mayor's office watching from behind tinted windows across the street. He looked only at Ray. Trump climbed the porch steps without hesitation, extending his hand. Ray stood slowly, his frame rigid from years of service, and recent bruises to his dignity. For a second, neither spoke. Their hands met in a firm, silent grip. And in that moment, the crowd stopped breathing. Then Trump turned around. He didn't take a podium. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he stepped off the porch, onto the cracked sidewalk, and began speaking, not to the cameras, but to the people. "You see this man behind me?" he said, voice low but firm. "He's not a symbol. He's a citizen. He's a Marine. And he's being erased by a system that forgot what America means." Applause rippled, restrained but rising. "You can bulldoze a building," he continued, "but you can't bulldoze a man's legacy. Not while I'm standing here." Someone shouted from the back, "What about zoning laws?" Trump didn't flinch. Zoning laws don't override sacrifice. If a city forgets its heroes, then it has no future worth building. The cameras clicked like a hailstorm. Reporters scribbled. Aerial drones buzzed above. The mayor's office issued a rushed statement within the hour. "The mayor respects all voices and is reviewing the situation carefully." But it was too late for reviews. That night, footage of Trump's visit aired on every major network. Even critics couldn't ignore it. Some called it grandstanding. Others called it theater. But for millions watching, it felt like something rare, a line drawn, By morning, petitions had quadrupled. Legal teams offered to represent Ray pro bono. Veterans across the country began staging quiet rallies on courthouse steps. And in Westbrook, orange fencing began disappearing one section at a time. Ray didn't say much after Trump left. He just returned to his porch, refolded his flag, and placed it beside him again. The wind blew, the sun dipped low, and for the first time in weeks, Ray Dawson felt like the country he served hadn't forgotten him after all. It didn't take long for the mayor's office to realize they'd miscalculated. The footage of Trump stepping onto Ray Dawson's porch was no longer just a political statement. It had become a symbol. It was replayed on morning shows, podcast panels, veteran forums, and TikTok videos edited to emotional music. Ray's image, standing behind that orange fencing with folded flag in hand, was now the backdrop of an argument about everything from veteran rights to overreaching government policy. Mayor Ellen Royce held a press conference the next afternoon. Behind a podium draped in the city seal, she stood between two advisors and forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We are, of course, grateful for Mr. Dawson's service. We regret that this issue has caused confusion," she began. But the questions from reporters weren't about confusion. Was Mr. Dawson targeted for political reasons? Why were demolition signs installed before legal proceedings concluded? Do you plan to resign if public backlash continues? She shifted, sweat beginning to gather at her collar. "This isn't about one man," she replied, but the room knew it had become exactly that. Across town, Ray wasn't watching the press conference. He was sitting at his kitchen table, flipping through letters, dozens of them. Some were from strangers. "You reminded me of my father. I never served, but I cried watching you stand your ground." One was from a woman in Montana who'd lost her husband in Afghanistan. She sent a photo of their children saluting the screen. Ray had never wanted this attention, but now, having received it, he understood what it meant. He wasn't just a symbol of resistance. He was proof that the invisible could still be seen. Later that evening, a representative from the city council arrived at his home, not with a notice, but with a formal apology. He carried an envelope with a resolution signed by every member, voiding the redevelopment order. "We were wrong," he said plainly. Ray didn't say much in response. He just nodded and invited the man to sit for coffee. They spoke for half an hour, about policy, about memory, about what happens when decisions are made without listening. The next day, the orange fencing came down. No cameras, no crowd, just a few city workers quietly rolling up tape and removing signs, careful not to trample the grass. A couple of veterans from the block stood nearby, arms crossed, not protesting, just watching. Ray's porch returned to what it had always been, a quiet place of observation. But now, it was more than that. It had become a landmark. The folded flag stayed on the table. Next to it, he placed a single photo, Trump shaking his hand. At dusk, a boy from down the street biked up and handed Ray a note. It read, "When I grow up, I want to be brave, like you." Ray folded the paper carefully, placed it under the flag, and looked out across the street where, weeks ago, the silence had felt so loud. Now the silence felt earned. That night, a final headline flashed across every news channel. "Veterans' home saved after national uproar. Mayor backs down. Trump's visit, credited with turning point." But Ray didn't see it. He was outside, staring up at the flagpole. He had replaced the old one with a new banner, crisp, bright, and gently waving in the wind. Not as a protest, not as a statement, but as a quiet promise. This land still remembers.